Now, my final ingredient for our entrepreneurs is to get them to be good at both managing process and content in their business at the same time. This is one of the most difficult, I accept, for ambitious entrepreneurs to pull off. Something that we see very frequently at the IA Center is businesses coming for advice to us with a specific issue. Something is distressing them right now in their business. And obviously, it's our role to help the business address that, look at it, what can they do. But quite quickly, I think both we and they often recognize that they have some more fundamental issues about how they go about the process of managing their valuable intellectual assets. But naturally, many business owners, despite their ambition, are absolutely overwhelmed by the things they have to do today, which are mainly to do with content. They don't get this opportunity of working on the longer term, very much working in their business rather than on their business. So what we suggest to that is that by utilizing all the talents, both within the business and by taking on board advice and support from outside the business, what the ambitious entrepreneur has the opportunity to do is to increase the amount of resources available to them. And I call that walking and chewing gum at the same time. So my fourth recommendation and my fourth ingredient for this ambitious cake is to walk and chew gum at the same time. So here we have 4 ingredients: better appraisal of risk, good appraisal of just what kind of risks you have and how to mitigate them. Posse up with good partners. Identify people you want to get in front of, talk to them, and convince them of how you can work together to actually realize these ambitions. Be innovative about your innovation and walk and chew gum at the same time. So do both process and content in your business at the same time. Now, what about the proportions? What am I suggesting in terms of these 4 ingredients? Are they all the same? Are they different? Well, that will depend on the context for the individual business. So there's going to be elements of experimentation to get the right proportions for different businesses. Those are the here and now things that businesses are dealing with on a regular basis to actually realize their ambitions. What about the background, these there and then barriers that prevent different businesses from moving ahead? Now, I know Lawrence would have spoken to you, I think, today about some of the things that the Intellectual Property Office is doing to try to help businesses to remove barriers and to allow them to be able to move faster and realize their ambition. And the Intellectual Property Office is one of the principal executive arms of the Business Innovation and Skills Department, and it will be helping Scottish businesses to realize their ambitions. I think he might have mentioned some of the following. You may be aware that the IPO have managed to gain a saving of £3 million, which is being transferred to the Technology Strategy Board and is to be used next year to be able to help 300 businesses to improve the exploitation of their intellectual property. I think it's for 1 year only. I think it starts on a calendar year basis next year. And for those who are interested, I understand there's a meeting in London taking place, I think on the 9th of December, but don't hold me to that date, but it's a date that I heard some time ago, which is going to talk more about how this funding is going to be used. So that's one of the first things, is actually helping individual businesses. I think he would have talked to you about the recent announcement by David Cameron of a review of the IP regime in the UK and how it interplays internationally, the so-called Hargreaves Review. And that's due to be completed in April 2011, I think, and hope that it's going to have a more radical impact on how businesses can exploit their intellectual property than the previous Gowers Review. But I do recognize it's always dangerous with unintended consequences of mucking around with systems, which have been used fairly widely for a number of years. He might have mentioned to you that the government is looking at changing the taxation of profits that come from intellectual property. This was something that the previous government had thought about. The coalition is picking up on this, and it is likely that profits generated from intellectual property are going to have a different tax treatment to ordinary profits generated in the business. Now, it had been said that those were related to patents alone, but the term intellectual property is being used for that, so it may well also come from earnings and profits from copyright as well as patents. It's an attempt to try to stop businesses offshoring where their IP resides, and a number of businesses are using this kind of forum shopping for where their IP goes. We don't want to lose valuable IP when it's generated in the UK and generated in Scotland particularly. Another innovation that's coming in and is being looked at is the possibility of a new British standard on giving IPR advice on commercializing IPR. This was consulted upon over the summer, and I think gained both positive and negative comment, but is going forward to the next stage. And for those of you who are interested in finding out more about this new British standard, Bob Williamson from ICAS is with us today, and he's been intimately involved in the development of this British standard. So if you'd like to know more, Bob's here to respond to questions. Other things happening in the background, innovation, there's still this ongoing problem with whether we're going to have a European patent or not. And this is something that's being discussed. This is what I mean about entrepreneurs not getting too hung up on what's happening, because these kind of discussions have been happening for tens of years. But interestingly, I noticed recently that 9 nations within the EU 27 have decided that if they can't actually get a European patent agreed, they're going to try and push just for an arrangement between those 9 nations. Now, that's an interesting development. It'll be interesting to see whether something comes of that. But the fact that we have these problems, which businesses say in the States and businesses in Japan and Korea don't have, we have to work on these, and we have to work on them as policymakers on an urgent basis. Now, although it's not the responsibility of the IPO, and I don't think Lawrence would have raised this, but something that we've been working on at the IA Centre is an international initiative called WIKI, which is the World Intellectual Capital Initiative, which is looking at how we can get some kind of standardization between businesses of how they measure and report on the use of their intellectual capital. Now, we talk in the IA Centre about hidden value. And it is a problem for businesses, because when they try to raise capital to be able to fund their ambitions, it's very difficult for them to point to where this security might lie to a potential funder. So if we can find some means which has common usage in a number of jurisdictions where they can depict the value that lies in their intellectual capital, this could improve their chances of accessing finance. And we were, in the IA Centre, initial signatories to the European part of this initiative, and there's a big meeting taking place actually next week on Tuesday at the IA Centre, in which a number of large concerns are coming along to the IA Centre for that purpose. This initiative has the support, for instance, of the European Financial Analyst Society. It's been backed by organizations like PricewaterhouseCoopers. So it does have some weight, and it could move forward this whole area of helping businesses demonstrate where the value lies when it's mainly intangible. Now, I was very interested in the outcome of the survey. And you refer to Arvind as, when we think of, would God gift the gears to see ourselves as others see us? I was intrigued and interested to see Scotland coming out probably higher than I thought in perception terms. And it made me wonder just how important perception is over hard data. I mean, I'm quite a data-driven person looking for hard figures. But I actually think it's quite important that perceptions held by not just people within Scotland, but also outside Scotland, play a big part in projecting ambition for Scotland. I remember discussions 20 years ago in which people said, you know, the only successful Scots that people know outside Scotland are people like Tom Farmer. And, you know, we look today and, you know, we didn't really see a business presence in the names. We saw Andy Murray, we saw Billy Connolly, we saw Alex Ferguson. I'm not really surprised that's the public perception. But it is disappointing not to see entrepreneurs in that list. And on the TV this morning, they were announcing the under 30 rich list. I don't know if you saw this on the news this morning. And when you looked at the top person was Daniel Radcliffe, and then Keira Knightley, and then it was Emma Watson and Rupert Grint. None of them are entrepreneurs. You know, it's obviously far easier to find 15 minutes of fame and to seek to be famous than it is to be successful in business. Now, is that a problem? Is it something to do with the psyche that we do not blow our own trumpets? That may well be the case. But the way it seems to be done, and in fact, it's interesting that Andy Murray was the top there of the well-known Scots, because what kind of image does Andy Murray project? To me, he projects hardworking, but doer. Now, do you think that perhaps is the perception of Scotland and Scottish entrepreneurs outside of Scotland? You know, it's difficult sometimes to get hard data on how Scotland is doing compared with other competing nations. Often we just get pulled into the whole of the UK when you look at absolute hard data. And we know that there are substantial differences between different parts of the UK. I mean, for instance, in terms of applications for patents to the European Patent Office, it's only this year that we've actually been able to discriminate Scotland from the other regions in the UK. It turns out that 4 regions, the Southwest, the Southeast, London, and the East of England, have 2/3 of all the applications from the UK for European patents. Am I surprised by it? Not particularly. I still think, to reflect the kind of comments that Brian was making and also that Rob was making, is the perception of ambitious for Scotland is equally important to any other hard data. And I think recognizing that where growth might lie in the future is not necessarily where it has been in the past. I think if we see Scotland become more ambitious in the growth areas, particularly of the East and Asia, and you know, when we looked at that list from the survey of where countries like China were coming out, this is where Scotland has to project its ambition. It has to focus its ambition on the areas and the regions and the countries that have the potential to satisfy the growth ambitions of entrepreneurs here. So, some conclusions. Do I think that Scotland's entrepreneurs will welcome help from outside? Different cooks have different responses to being proprietary about their kitchens. As far as the Russell kitchen is concerned at Christmas, what is welcomed is a good dollop of eggnog and Pimm's, so that's very welcome. There's plenty of assistance for Scottish ambitious entrepreneurs to help them to realize their ambitions for the future. There's quite specialized assistance and people who really do know the sectors that they are assisting. I forecast in the next few years that the appetite for experimentation by our ambitious Scottish entrepreneurs will increase. I think the encouragement from the professional advisors will be called upon. And I think as far as public sector support is concerned, there will be more focus on economic growth than ever. But in the big society, it's likely that there'll be more emphasis on the cooks helping themselves. And there's an old saying that Providence helps those who help themselves. And in the Russell kitchen, the adage is, Providence needs to help those who get caught helping themselves. Thank you very much.